So yesterday we have started a discussion on Unit 2. So in that we have discussed, so Unit 2 is specifically related to drugs. We are going to discuss the drugs which are acting on the autonomic nervous system. Now, autonomic nervous system is what? How come it is divided? What type of responses are given by the sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system? This we have seen. Now we are going to discuss a very important point from this chapter, that is neurotransmitter. Now we have seen, I have given an example of when somebody is going to prick a pin to a tip of finger. So the pain is, so the response, whatever response that your finger is paining, this response is given to the brain, and brain is going to take an response or effective action to withdraw your hand from this pin. So this response signal or this response is conveyed through some secretions of the neuron, and those secretions are known as neurotransmitters. Now, these neurotransmitters are divided into, so the neurotransmitters which are involved in the sympathetic nervous system are noradrenaline, which is also known as norepinephrine, and the neurotransmitters which are involved or which is going to convey the message of which type of system? Parasympathetic nervous system. That neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. Now we have seen this example, but instead of this snake, I have taken or we have talked about the tiger. So the response is shown by the, so there will be an homeostasis, is a dynamic balance between the autonomic branches. Now we know there are two branches of autonomic nervous system. What are those two branches? Parasympathetic nervous system and sympathetic nervous system. Now what happened? When the snake is going to catch this person, or when the snake is going to bite this person is going to run away from this snake to protect yourself from this snake. So what he is going to show, this type of responses that person is going to show in order to protect himself from the snake. But after that, when he is going to realize that snake is gone on his way and he has protected himself, so he is going to take an resting position. So when he is going to show the walking or the running action to protect himself, so the system is activated, that is sympathetic system. This type of response we have already discussed, fight or flight. So that time, which type of activity will dominate? Sympathetic activities dominate. And when everything is normalized, so he is going to take the rest and digest. So the response shown is a parasympathetic nervous system. Now, very important point. The sympathetic and parasympathetic, what are the effects of those two in our body? They are totally controversy shown by the sympathetic response and the parasympathetic response. So we are going to discuss the individual response with respect to the organs from the sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic, yesterday we have seen this, but just we will revise. Sympathetic system will dilate the pupils, but in the case of parasympathetic, it is going to constrict the pupils. Lungs, dilation, then this will constrict the bronchioles and increase the secretions of the bronchioles. Heart, increase heart rate, decrease heart rate. Blood vessels, constrict blood vessel in the case of parasympathetic, because relaxed position is there, he is going to dilate the blood vessels. Then gastrointestinal system, relax smooth muscles of the gastrointestinal tract, increases peristalsis in the case of parasympathetic nervous system. Bladder, relaxes bladder muscle, constrict bladder muscle. Uterus, relaxes the uterine muscle, and whereas it is not applicable. Now, salivary gland, in the case of sympathetic, no response, but in the case of parasympathetic, increases salivation. Now, we are going to discuss a very important point from this unit, that is adrenergic neurotransmitters. What is the name of the topic? Adrenergic drugs. and we are going to discuss the what is the ANS, CNS drugs, what are the drugs which are acting on the autonomic nervous system. So before we actually proceed, here we are going to discuss adrenergic neurotransmitters. Now we have already seen what type of nerves are involved in the sympathetic nervous system, and who is going to dominate or who is going to control this homeostasis with all these organs. So in the case of sympathetic nervous system, spinal cord and E's nerve endings are involved in the showing of sympathetic response to these many organs. What are those organs? Eye, already we have discussed. Eye, lung, heart, blood vessels, gastrointestinal system, urinary bladder, and uterus. Now, the adrenergic are also known as adrenergic. We all know that autonomic nervous system is divided into sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. But the drugs which are going to stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, त्यांना काय म्हटलं जातं? Adrenergic drugs. See, the name of topic is adrenergic. So the drugs which are going to stimulate which system? Sympathetic nervous system is known as adrenergic drug. This adrenergic drugs or the adrenergic system, it is also known as adrenergic agonist. Agonist is nothing but when any substance is going to bind to the adrenergic receptor, he is going to show the responses same with the sympathetic nervous system. किंवा त्यांनी जे काही responses show करतात, these are nothing but sympathetic type of responses they are going to show. So those are known as adrenergic agonists. Those drugs are known as or sympathomimetics. Why sympathomimetics? Because those drugs are going to mimic means increase the effect of sympathetic nervous system. म्हणून त्यांनाच कसली सिस्टीम म्हणतात? Sympathomimetics. म्हणजेच adrenergic त्यांनाच म्हणलं जातं adrenergic agonist आणि त्यांनाच म्हणलं जातं sympathomimetics. So the neurotransmitters which are involved in this system are norepinephrine and epinephrine.
आम्ही खाली चाललो चायनीज खायला.
Now, so the adrenergic drugs are also known as adrenergic agonist or sympathomimetics, or what are the neurotransmitters which are basically involved in the system? They are norepinephrine and epinephrine. And these norepinephrine and epinephrine are known as catecholamines. Now, we all know catechol and amine. Now, why these neurotransmitters of sympathetic nervous system किंवा adrenergic nervous system ला का म्हणलं जातं catecholamines? The name given to those neurotransmitters, that is catecholamines, is because of their chemical nature or their chemical structure. Their chemical structure involves the presence of catechol ring. Catechol ring is nothing but two hydroxyl groups are attached to the benzene ring. So they are going to have their structure catechol plus amine. That's why they are nominated as a catecholamine. So what are the neurotransmitters which are involved in the sympathetic nervous system or adrenergic agonist? They are norepinephrine and epinephrine as well as dopamine. Now, chemically they are catecholamines. Why catecholamines? Because their structure is catecholamine. So this is catechol and this ethylamine moiety, they have joined together to form dopamine, first neurotransmitter. Second neurotransmitter is norepinephrine and third will be epinephrine. So these are all the neurotransmitters which are going to convey the messages, which are going to convey the impulse from first nerve ending to the second nerve. Now, very important point is how these catecholamines. What is catecholamines? Catecholamines means dopamine and epinephrine and norepinephrine, how they are synthesized in our body. So the endogenous catecholamines, that is dopamine, noradrenaline, and adrenaline, they are synthesized from the tyrosine. So the starting point for the synthesis of these catecholamines are tyrosine. Now we all know tyrosine is the amino acid which is available in our body, which we are going to take from the our balanced diet, and our balanced diet has the presence of this amino acid, that is tyrosine, and this tyrosine will form these neurotransmitters in our body. So what will be the mechanism, or what will be the steps which are involved in the synthesis of these neurotransmitters? They are L-tyrosine is hydroxylated by the enzyme tyrosine hydroxylase, will convert the L-tyrosine into L-dopamine, L-dopa. Now, this is the rate limiting first step as well as rate limiting step. Means whatever this conversions are taken place during this biosynthesis, this step is rate limiting. Whatever amount or how much amount of dopamine or neurotransmitters are formed are totally depending upon this step. That's why this step is the rate limiting step for the synthesis or biosynthesis of catecholamines. Now what happened next? This dopa decarboxylase. So the formed dopa later on decarboxylase itself to convert the L-dopa into dopamine. Dopamine is also the neurotransmitter for the sympathetic nervous system. Now what happened next? Now this dopamine beta hydroxylase enzyme, the next enzyme is coming in picture, which will hydroxylase this dopamine and convert a dopamine into an norepinephrine, very important neurotransmitter of autonomic nervous system. And further, this norepinephrine is converted into an epinephrine by phenylethanolamine and methyl transferase. So one of the methyl group is joined to the amine group of norepinephrine molecule. That's why norepinephrine is converted into the epinephrine molecule. So by these mechanisms, our neurotransmitters of adrenergic nervous systems are synthesized. They are dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. So what is the mechanism? So the endogenous catecholamines, that is dopamine, noradrenaline, and adrenaline. That means dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. They are synthesized from the tyrosine. Tyrosine enters the adrenergic nerve via aromatic L-aminotransmoter. That is sodium tyrosine transporter. Sodium tyrosine hydroxylate will oxidize tyrosine into dihydroxyphenylalanine. See, we have already seen dihydroxyphenylalanine, and this dihydroxyphenylalanine undergo decarboxylation to convert dopamine, and dopamine is the neurotransmitter in the dopaminergic neuron. See, what the neurotransmitter is formed, but it is specific in nature for which type of receptors? Dopaminergic neurons. Then noradrenaline is the main neurotransmitter in the adrenergic neuron, and but in the adrenal medulla, noradrenaline is converted into adrenaline by enzyme phenylethanolamine and amine transferase. Noradrenaline म्हणजेच norepinephrine आणि adrenaline म्हणजे epinephrine by the enzyme phenylethanolamine and methyl transferase. So the methyl group is transferred. So adrenaline is the main neurotransmitter in the adrenal medulla. So in this way, in our body, the biosynthesis of catecholamines is done. Now, how come these neurotransmitters are released in the nerve ending? See, this is nerve. Here there will be an synthesis of neurotransmitters will done, and these neurotransmitters are released at the first nerve endings to carry the impulses. Now, we are going to see these steps for the release of neurotransmitters at the nerve ending. So what happened? On arrival of impulse at the adrenergic nerve ending, the voltage gated calcium channels get open. See, this is the nerve ending, and when the impulse, see, somebody has pricked a pin to the tip of fingers. So this impulse is coming through these nerves. So when this impulse is coming, so step number 1 will be happening synthesis of neurotransmitters, because the calcium ions are get open, calcium channels are get open. Meanwhile, there will be an synthesis of neurotransmitters will be done. Now, what next? That leads to the influx of calcium ion. Calcium channel get open. This triggered calcium causes rupture of synaptic vesicles by the process called exocytosis. So when all calcium ions of the peripheral, if entered into the lab, they are going to trigger the rupture of synaptic vesicles by process called exocytosis, and this release of noradrenaline into the synaptic cleft. So this release of noradrenaline binds to the alpha receptor or beta receptors, which are present on the presynaptic or postsynaptic membrane, which will initiate the pharmacological response. So we'll see this diagram in detail. See what happened. Some response is coming or some impulse is coming from this nerve ending. Before that, there will be an synthesis of these adrenergic receptors, adrenergic neurotransmitters under. What are those neurotransmitters? Epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine. So they are all synthesized. But the release of these synthesized neurotransmitters are totally depending upon the entry of calcium ions. आणि ज्यावेळी impulse या nerve मधून carry केला जातो, that time he will enters or make the entry of those calcium ions inside the nerve. Once the calcium ion is inside the nerve it will activate or it will initiate it will triggers the rupture of synaptic vesicle. जेवढा जास्त प्रमाणात कॅल्शियम आयन्स या ठिकाणी जमा होतील, he is going to or they are going to rupture the synaptic vesicle. Now once the rupture of synaptic vesicles done, there will be a release of neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft. जेवढे काही न्यूरोट्रान्समीटर्स असतील, मग तिघे असतील किंवा तिघांच्या रिक्वायरमेंट नुसार those neurotransmitters are released into the synaptic cleft. And this synaptic cleft एकतर nerve ending असेल किंवा दुसऱ्या nerve सुरुवात असेल, where there will be an presence of alpha receptors as well as beta receptors, which are present on the post or presynaptic membrane, and they are going to initiate the pharmacological response. एकदा का adrenaline or adrenaline release झाले की they are going to show their actions. आता कशा टाइपच्या actions आहेत, this we have already seen. Dilation of pupil, then increased heart rate. So they are all the responses. Now how these neurotransmitters are metabolized in our body? So they are metabolized by two main enzymes, catechol O-methyl transferase and monoamino oxidase. So these are the two enzymes which are going to metabolize these released neurotransmitters. Catecholamines is present in the circulating blood and this enzyme degrades the circulating catecholamines. This enzyme is present in the blood, and no doubt we have released these catecholamines in the systemic circulation. So they are going to degrade the circulating catecholamines. Whereas this is catechol O-methyl transferase, and monoamino oxidase is located in the adrenergic neuron, and this degrade the noradrenaline which is located in the adrenergic nerve. See, monoamino oxidase फक्त कुणाला मेटाबोलाइज करतोय? Noradrenaline. Then catechol O-methyl transferase, monoamino oxidase, and aldehyde dehydrogenase, they are going to degrade the all catecholamines into multiple intermediates compound, and these multiple intermediates and finally into the valine mandelic acid, which is excreted through the urine. यांचं मेटाबॉलिझम करून ते कन्वर्ट कशामध्ये केले जातात? मल्टिपल इंटरमिजिएट कंपाऊंड, आणि ते मल्टिपल इंटरमिजिएट कंपाऊंड फायनली व्हॅनिलिन मॅन्डेलिक ऍसिड मध्ये कन्वर्ट होतात, आणि दिस व्हॅनिलिन मॅन्डेलिक ऍसिड इज excreted throughout the body. So this is a mechanism of release of neurotransmitter. See, this is a very important one. They are going to ask the questions for 8 marks or 10 marks. So we are going to see the actions. Once the synthesis of noradrenaline will be done and impulse is coming, so what happens? Step number 2, uptake into the storage vesicle. If they are not in use or immediately they are not required to release them into the nerve endings, they may be stored. Uptake into the storage vesicles. So dopamine enters the vesicles and it is converted to the norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is protected from the degradation in the vesicles and transport them into the vesicles for initiation of the responses. Now the next, once all the calcium ion text entered into the synaptic vesicles, there will be a release of neurotransmitters. So the influx of calcium causes fusion of vesicles with the cell membrane. Calcium ions enter मध्ये झाले, they are going to fuse with the vesicles in the cell membrane. Calcium, when it is going to be entered into the nerve, so they are going to fuse with the vesicles which will contain the neurotransmitter. So this is a vesicle which is going to contain the neurotransmitter, and they are going to release the neurotransmitter, and this release is blocked by the gonethidine and pterinium. So these are the two chemicals or the compounds which are going to inhibit this release. Now, when they are going to release in the nerve ending or preganglionic nerve, they are bind to the receptors. So the post-synaptic receptors activated by binding the neurotransmitters. So these are the receptors which are present on the cell, either cell किंवा second nerve ending, they are going to bind. And if they are not bind, they are metabolized. This norepinephrine is methylated by catecholamine O-methyl transferase and oxidized by monoamino oxidase. Now later on, after metabolism, removal of norepinephrine. This replacement of norepinephrine is rapidly taken into the neuron and uptake inhibited by the cocaine and imipramine. So this is a flow of working for the neurotransmitter release in our body, or the biosynthesis of neurotransmitters in our body. Now, adrenergic receptors. What are the types of receptors which are involved in the autonomic nervous system? Now, whatever we have seen up till now, adrenergic neurons, adrenergic glands, and adrenergic receptors. Now, what are these adrenergic receptors on which these adrenergic neurotransmitters are going to act? They are the sites where adrenergic drug bind and produce their effect. So they are divided into two types: alpha receptors and beta receptors. So they call them as a alpha adrenergic and beta adrenergic receptors, depending upon whether they respond to the norepinephrine or epinephrine. Both alpha and beta adrenergic receptors have subtypes which are designated as 1 and 2. प्रत्येकाला त्यांचे त्यांचे सबटाइप्स आहेत अल्फा 1, अल्फा 2, बीटा 1, बीटा 2. Now we are going to see these receptors in detail. Adrenergic receptors, they can call them as a adrenoreceptor. They are of selective for noradrenaline. They are for selective for noradrenaline and adrenaline. There are two types of adrenergic receptors. Alpha 1 adrenergic receptors divided into alpha 1 and alpha 2. Alpha 1 adrenoreceptor is a type of G protein coupled receptor and which is associated with GQ type of G protein. When adrenaline binds to this G protein coupled receptor, they are converted the GDP into the GTP. Energy is formed. GTP complex bind to the membrane bound plasma lipases and activate PLC. So they are going to activate the PLC, which will convert the membrane phospholipid channels. So they are going to activate the phospholipid channels, convert membrane phospholipid phosphatidyl inositol 4,5 biphosphate into the inositol 1,4,5 triphosphate and diacylglycerol. C, they are going to convert the GDP into the GTP. Now what GTP is going to do? Bind to the membrane and bound phospholipase enzyme. And this binding will activate phospholipid channel, which will convert the membrane phospholipid into the membrane phospholipid phosphatidyl inositol into the inositol 1,4,5 transphosphate and diacylglycerol. This diacylglycerol remain in the membrane and activates protein kinase. Whatever diacylglycerol is formed, which is remain in the membrane and activate protein kinase enzyme. This activated protein kinase channel phosphorylates several cellular proteins. This inositol 5-phosphate stimulate the release of calcium from the endoplasmic reticulum into the cytosol. And the release of calcium are responsible for the action. So in order to show the further release of neurotransmitter. So the calcium ion bound to the calmodulin proteins activates the MLCK, myosin light chain kinase, and activated myosin light chain causes phosphorylation of myosin light chain kinase. Now, the release of neurotransmitters and how they are going to proceed is work. So this is an signal molecule, that is neurotransmitter. They are going to bound to this G protein linking or G protein receptor alpha 1, followed by there will be an activation of phospholipid channels, which will convert GTP into GDP. Now during this conversion, they are going to form activated phospholipid channel, and this activated phospholipid channel will transfer formed inositol phospholipid into the further. Now this activated protein kinase, when protein kinase is going to activate, when the inositol pyrophosphate will release or will bind with the drug molecule. So they are going to activate the protein kinase and opens the calcium channel in the endoplasmic reticulum. So this type of response is shown by adrenergic receptors, that is alpha 1 receptors. Important location of alpha 1 adrenoreceptors: vascular smooth muscle, genitourinary smooth muscles, radial muscles, internal muscle. So these are all regions where there will be a presence of these many receptors. So vascular smooth muscle, vasoconstriction. Genitourinary smooth muscle, contraction, because these are what type of amines or what type of neurotransmitter they are सिम्पॅथोमायमेटिक न्यूरोट्रान्समीटर. आणि हे सिम्पॅथोमायमेटिक न्यूरोट्रान्समीटर कुठल्या रिसेप्टर वरती जाऊन बाइंड होत आहे? ॲड्रेनर्जिक रिसेप्टर वरती. ॲड्रेनर्जिक रिसेप्टर कुठला रिसेप्टर? अल्फा 1 रिसेप्टर, म्हणजेच sympathomymetic receptors. So there will be an increasing rate of monoamine oxidase amine. The calcium binds to the diptophan, which leads to the increasing in the actin myosin, which will convert the heart muscle contraction. So these are all the actions shown by now. What type of action will be shown on the liver? Liver increase the glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis. Yesterday we have seen sympathomimetic response means they need an energy, so which will increase the conversion of glycogen into the glucose. Monoamine oxidase causes activation of protein kinase, and diacylglycerol causes activation of protein kinase, and this activated protein kinase causes phosphorylation of enzyme, which is needed for glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis. So these are all the actions shown by the alpha 1 adrenergic receptors. Now, alpha 2 receptors. This is also a G protein coupled receptor. Binds to adrenaline. When it is bind to this receptor, will convert GDP to the GTP. GTP complex bind to the membrane bound aldehyde, adenyl cyclase, and the inhibited adenyl cyclase decrease the formation of cyclic AMP. The alpha GTP complex also initiates the protein channel. So this increase the removal of protein ions from the cell to the outside. This decreasing in the potential inside the cell, that is hyperpolarization. And the alpha GTP complex, which also initiate the calcium channels. So this alpha 2 receptors we will discuss in the next class. Will you please drop your attendance in the chat box?